As with anything that I make, we always start with a cardboard or a paper template. That small piece was a tiny version of this. This is the most important part of your entire thing because this determines the size of the rest of the parts. That piece will become the front cone of the launcher. To cut this out, all you need to do is cut out a circle. It doesn't really matter what size it is, but you cut a line down the center of the circle and then you start rolling the piece on itself. Eventually you'll have a cone. Find a size you like, note where that is, and cut that part out. Next thing you know, you got your cone. The rest of the pieces just match the cone, basically. The small piece just wraps around the front end, so as long as it fits, it's good. Then the larger rectangle piece, that is the body. You can make it bigger or smaller so it can fit inside or outside of the cone. And then the small rectangle will just wrap around the outside. Most important thing you can do is to take your template and compare its size to whatever you're attaching it to, just to make sure that it looks right when it's on top of it. If it's all good, then you can start cutting it out. I made mine out of PVC foam, but you don't have to. You can do it even out of cardboard if you want. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's exact either, because this is a cheap, easy to make project, and a lot of this requires you molding with your hands. You can be as precise as you want, or you can be as inaccurate as you want. I went very inaccurately, and it turned out pretty okay. So it's all up to you and what you want to do, really. If you're working with PVC foam, just use scissors. Trust me, it's a lot easier than trying to use an X-Acto knife. Sure, the X-Acto knife would probably make a better cut, but it saves so much time using scissors. While editing this video, I kind of saw where I went wrong. So later on in the video, you'll see that I'll have to add a little addition to the strip, the rectangular strip that connects to the main body piece of the rectangle. And that is because I was using scrap pieces of the PVC foam left over from previous projects. Now, you shouldn't run into this, but just letting you know so that when you see it, that's what it is. Once everything was cut out, it was time to heat it up and to form it. This isn't the safest method of doing this, so please don't burn your house down because of me. But if you find the melting point or the point where your plastic or whatever it is starts to bend really easy, find that and do it safely. I know mine because I've done 3 projects with it and I can do it without burning myself or burning the house down. So once you've got that, bend it to a nice little cone for your first piece and continue on. You can touch it up a few times because you most likely will need it, but again, this is because I'm doing it by hand, and you probably would want to use specific rolling things, and you could definitely make this better if you 3D print it or something. But again, this is super cheap and easy to do. The most annoying piece is the small little cone, and I kind of gave up on that. I just made a cone in the end, and I carved out the inside because I wasn't getting it to wrap around. Next comes the central tube piece, and basically you just roll it up. I didn't really put much effort into this part, although in the end you'll see that it shows. So you should probably try to put a little more effort than I did at this stage, just so that the end result turns out much better than mine did. Now for the small piece, you just heat it up and wrap it around the back side of the cylinder. And here is where I realized that I used the wrong markings. So off camera, I had to create a small little square to fit under that piece. Now to make the launcher holes, I just poked holes into the cone with a compass. It worked, so that's what I did. I messed up a few times, so I had to reheat it, and that sealed up the holes, but I think it turned out pretty okay in the end. Here is the result for the holes. I ended up making the holes slightly bigger so you could see them easier, but even though it's not perfectly symmetrical, I think it's pretty good. And here are all the pieces, including 2 more circles that I will be using as caps to put it together. I didn't really want the launcher to be black, so here I am priming the parts for painting. I picked out the color scheme and I got to work. After the primer was ready, I got the silver spray paint out and painted the pieces. I did 2 coats of this with, I think, a few hours of time in between. During the second coat, I also spray painted a tiny ring around the main cylinder piece, just for the accent. I really like how this paint turned out. It's not super shiny, but it does have that metallic feel. If you decide to spray paint the cone, spray paint it upside down so that the paint doesn't get inside the holes. To add more detail, I cut out some strips out of the foam and I started gluing them to the cylinder. The number of strips added doesn't really matter, just as long as it's kind of symmetrical and it looks good. But I didn't put any on the bottom because I was going to make a stand for it, and you'll see what I mean later. And this is how it turned out. Pretty much the only thing left to do is to put it together and to glue it. Now, if you've been following along with this video, maybe here, watch the rest first. So here I am gluing the back piece, or the cap, to the cylinder. Maybe don't do this, but here, do finish the circle with the cap piece. Now, you'll see why in a minute. You can do all of this without having to glue the rear piece to the main cylinder. And that's how it should look like. And I think it looks pretty good. Now, here is where things go different. I thought at first that it would be better to put the end piece outside of the rear cap piece. Now, I'm going to glue it here, but off camera, I removed it and cut it down and glued it to the inside of it. And this is much easier done when the rear cap piece is not connected to the cylinder. The cone is probably the trickiest piece to do. It could be probably easy if you were just to glue all the pieces together and not worry about fusing it, but because I wanted to try a little harder, I decided to use glue to make a little slope, to make it look like it was more of a connected piece rather than just 3 pieces glued together. Just like that, I used the side of the glue gun to press down to shape the glue while I rotated the cone piece. It's certainly not perfect, but it's not that hard, as long as you make sure that there's no strands sticking out that will make some problems when you respray it. After twisting a knife around the tiny little cone, just put glue in there and stick it to the end of the other cone. It's probably the best thing to do. To make it more proportional, I probably should have cut down the size of the smaller cone, but I didn't really notice it, so I'm keeping it like that for now. I think I reheated the end of the tiny cone in order to straighten it out a bit, and after that I resprayed the larger cone. After removing, cutting out, and re-gluing the end piece of the cap portion of the launcher, here it is being re-glued back to the cylinder. After I glued it down, I kind of realized that it came out a little bit crooked, so if you're doing this by hand, pay a little more attention than I did. For the final part of the main launcher, just glue the cone to the cylinder. Probably the easiest step of this whole thing. After it dries, you're ready to glue it onto your gauntlet or make a stand for it. I made mine just by attaching some more foam into a little box and just having it act like a little buffer to lift it up. And that's how it turned out. It's not the best, but I think it works fine. Down the line, I'm thinking about bringing it a little bit closer to my arm and also shortening the cylinder, but this is not too bad for such a cheap and easy project. Although, a 3D printed one probably would be a lot better. So that's the video. If you've enjoyed it, or if it has helped you in any way, please leave a like. If you got any questions or comments, leave them down in the comment section down below. And if you want to make sure that you never miss another video, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.